Well, it's a good afternoon and good evening here in Australia, on the east coast of Australia. We don't go to daylight saving here in Queensland. We just get the cyclones and the humidity. So, and we only have two seasons, the wet and the dry, and we're obviously in the wet. So on a Thursday night, nothing surprises me anymore. Not when we've got Andrina Forrest, who's our co-host in the UK, when she unearths these amazing people. In this case, it's Justin Newland. So without further ado, Andrina, I'll hand it over to you to bring Justin on board.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Good morning, everybody. Good evening, good day, wherever you are in the world, or if you are listening to the replay. Today is the 25th of January, 2024. And it's with great pleasure that we have Justin Newland back on the show today. Now, Justin came on, I looked it up, when you came back, you were on the show on the 24th of March, 2022. So it's almost 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. My, how time flies. Anyway, welcome, Justin. It's lovely to have you back.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on the show, guys. Lovely to be back.
Right. So let's start from the very beginning, because you're an author of 5 published books. You've got another one in the making. You just seem to, the books just flow out of you and flow out of you and flow out of you like your words. So where were you born?
Well, I was born, I live on the west coast of England at the moment, near Bristol, but I was born on the east coast in a place called Southend, which bears striking similarities to where I live now, because it's on an estuary. It's got a pier that burns down every now and again. And across the water, there's a coastline you can see. Every summer, it's invaded by drunken tourists from some major city. And that's basically a description of a lot of English estuary towns. But that's Southend for you.
Well, it's not a place that I've been, but anyway.
No, well, you haven't missed anything, Andrew.
Say no more.
Yeah.
Anyway,
you haven't missed anything, I can tell you that. You haven't missed anything.
Right. Talking about writing, because I know I've already read one of your books, and my gosh, for me, I'm not really into thrillers and that type of book, and I just don't read anymore like I used to. I used to read all the time, but I for some reason I just don't seem to read at this moment in time. But I know when I read your book, it was like, oh, there was just so much in there. If I left it for a couple of days, I had to go back and reread the story and the characters, because there was so much information in there. So were you, if we go back to school days, were you, because like some people just write stories and it just flows out of them. Did you start your writing from an early age, or did it come later in life?
Well, yeah, I did actually. I remember writing a novel, sort of, and some short stories when I was a student.
Right.
And sort of trying my pen to paper in those days, as it was. But then in sort of kind of my middle years, I did a lot of research and read a lot about history and historical periods, and got very interested in different historical eras. So when I came about 15 years ago to decide, well, I need a project to keep me occupied in my later years, I thought, well, I've read a lot, I've done a bit of research, and they say, as a writer, write about what you know about. Now, of course, when it comes down to it, we don't really know much about anything at all, but I knew a little bit about history in these periods. So I thought, I'll write about ancient Egypt, I'll write about medieval China, I'll write a bit about Middle Eastern Europe, and so on, Elizabethan England, and I finally realized as well that if you've got a passion about that particular era or what you're writing about, you're going to get readers, because that passion is going to get transferred to the page. And if you're bored with the period you're talking about, or reading or writing, that will also transfer to the page. So it does help to be interested.
Well, yeah.
in what you're talking about for that reason. So that's a bit of a précis, if that helps.
So, your very first novel, when did that come about? How did it come about? And have you got like an open channel where the words just flow through, or do you have to sit and think about the next plot or the next person?
I think, yeah, probably with your own experience with healing, I imagine it's the same. That, you know, I might write 2,000 words in a day, and that's generally seems to be what most authors aim for. But I wouldn't say that, you know, it all flows out in those 2,000 words. There might be 100 or a couple of hundred in the middle of it or towards the end where you feel, you know, that lovely feeling where something else is trying to write through you. You know, I suppose they call it the muse, or I don't know what you call it, but that's the joy and satisfaction, I suppose, of what you aim for. You know, so when, for example, you guys have asked me to read an extract, I look for those passages that I feel had that flowing. And hopefully I'll maybe read one to you a bit later on.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah. Right, so let's go back to the very first book. When was this first book published? And I think Jeff's got a picture of the 5 books that you've got together so far.
Yeah.
So for people to see. So which was the very first one?
So the first one was in the bottom left-hand corner there, the genes of Isis. So that's really mythological fiction. And genes of Isis is another way of saying Genesis. Genesis means beginnings and origins and starting point. And it takes the story from the book of Genesis of basically fallen angels who mate with the women of the time, create a mixed genetic race called the Nephilim, and then at the end of which there's a big flood, a lot of water. Yeah. So it's a bit like where Jeff is. It starts very dry and ends up very wet. Is that right, Jeff?
Sounds like Queensland.
So I tell you, and that has been a theme through all the novels, because I guess overall the overview of my novels is probably like yourselves. I'm interested in where we are today, how we got here to where we've got to today, and how that makes us ready or not for what's coming tomorrow. So they're, you know, to my mind, they are the questions for me. They're my passion that I'm exploring in each of the novels in different ways. And so, looking back at the first civilization, which is generally considered to be ancient Egypt, you know, there's an idea that, say, in psychoanalysis, you know, a person's having trouble in their adulthood, so they go and see a psychiatrist, and he says, "Well, tell me about your childhood." Now, the reason they do that is they know that what in the formative period of one's life, that sets the blueprint for everything that follows. So, using the same reasoning, the first civilization is going to set the blueprint, in other words, the pattern or the template for what comes after it. In other words, all the rest of world history. So, you know, that kind of premise is what sparks my work and what inspired me to write The Genes of Isis, which explores in some detail not just the components of our civilization, but also, you know, the very basics of who and what we are, which is, in other words, our genes. Genes of Isis. Isis, Egyptian goddess. Genes is basically the programs that run us. Okay. You know, our instinct, our moving center, our senses, all those come out of the construct of our genes. But so that novel is a speculative account of how we got our genes.
So would you, so would you like to follow on and share a little about each? Because if people haven't heard about you before and they like what you're saying, what you're, would you like to sort of follow on to your second book?
Sure.
And so from the first book, were you already getting the storyline for the second book? Like, how soon does it all happen?
Well, the first book actually took a lot of work because I was basically learning from scratch. I'd never done a literary degree. A lot of writers, they go to Oxford or Cambridge or some university. They learn English lit. They're taught about structure of novels and what have you. I was kind of coming from the outside, so learning as I went. Getting on the bike and falling off every 5 minutes and getting back on again. I guess actually that book is 105,000 words published, but I reckon I probably wrote 1 million words. I actually sent it to an editor. I think the original draft was 180,000 words, and he gave me a lot of feedback, and I ended up writing 2 further novels which aren't published as backstory, exploring the world, because it was a kind of fantastical world, our world, but fantastical elements in it, like the pyramids and waters in the sky, because you might have heard of this sort of myth where, if you think about the flood, you've got to ask, how did the waters get up there in the first place for there to be a flood for 40 days? So this novel presupposes that the waters are up in the sky, okay, and have been for years and years and years, and circulate around and round and round. And of course, the idea is in those days that it took the sand up with them. So when they came down, the sands didn't come down all around the world. They came around the Sahara, the Kalahari, and so on around the tropics, and that's how the deserts were formed. I don't know if you've heard that kind of notion, but that's the kind of things I explore in the novel, and gets my passion up because I love that kind of high esoteric stuff. So the second book, after some years of reworking and working the first one, I decided to look at China. And the second book is called The Old Dragon's Head, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner. That is set on the Great Wall of China, as the cover of the novel suggests. You can see the semblance of the Great Wall there. It's actually set in a real place. I wanted to also explore the outplay and impact of Chinese thought and understanding on our world, because I think it has had not as much an impact as Egypt, excuse me, but still a significant impact. The whole essence of the ideas of family, because the essence, or one of the essence of Confucian thought, is that the family is the microcosm of the state, if you like, which is the macrocosm. And so if the family is in order, and that the ordering of yang and yin and the masculine and feminine principles are in balance in a family, then if every family is in balance, then the state is in balance. And they kind of work from, what they see, I love this phrase at the moment, they see in the now, they see the eternal. Because in each moment, which is of course part of the eternal, they see the importance of the small things in the big things, the family in the state, and so on. So they have this idea that the yellow land, because they have a yellow emperor who sits on the dragon throne, is occupied by a supernatural or numinous dragon. So that's, I don't make this stuff up. History's it's wonderful. And this dragon partly occupies the Great Wall. would you believe, and will rise up and defend its northern borders if they are attacked. Of course, the Mongols who are in the north didn't work very well in the 13th century because they got invaded. And because they were invaded and they believed in karma, you understand the principle of karma, they thought they were living in the wrong way to have invited the invasion. Okay. So when the Ming Dynasty is founded by the Hongwu Emperor, is what his name was, he sets about trying to reset his nation and his people to live more in harmony with the gods, with the spirits, with the angels, or whatever they called them. And he wrote a book, or his mandarins wrote a book called The Great Ming Code, which I read a sort of extract of it. It's quite extraordinary because it's probably the last time in world history where a state tried to impose religious ideals upon its people, religious statues, fully fledged religious statues, because it told them, they had to make sacrifices to this god and that god. They have, we have, what do we have? We have, gods of the kitchen. We pay worship and homage to Saturday Kitchen, right? And MasterChef, right? So by comparison, they had gods of the kitchen. They literally had to worship the kitchen. I don't know how they did it, but they had gods of the kitchen. So just by comparison, so I try to get into the mindset, because we think, people believe in religion, but I don't think it was belief for them. I think they were imbued with it. They lived it. They didn't think about belief. They were in it, which is different. And so that's what I tried to conjure in the novel. And to go back to the origin of the name, the old dragon's head. So the Great Wall was perceived as running basically from west to east. And the far eastern end of the Great Wall is where it meets the sea. And that's about 100 kilometers or miles east of Beiping. So where it meets the sea is the head of the old dragon, which is the old dragon's head. So it's a real place. And that provided the setting for my second novel, which is historical fiction and is set in 1400, during a historical period. So I read up about the history of the time, how there was a war of succession between the emperor who just died, his son and his grandson, and sort of placed the hero and some of the characters in that setting. One of whom was quite difficult, as you might know if you've seen or read of that period, is trying to include women in the story, because they had such a they weren't given a prominent role in life in those days, not a visible one anyway. So I managed to find one, and she was a seer, and people went to see her because I wanted to use the whole idea of the transmigration of souls, which you might be familiar with. Mm-hmm. The Buddhists have this notion of choosing the Tibetan Lama. They don't sort of vote it like the Christian folks do on the next pope. They assume that the soul of the dead Lama, the top Lama, the Dalai Lama, has gone to somebody else. And they then have to wait a few years before they can identify who it's gone to. Because it goes to a child that's just being born. Mm. So I had this conception that this lady in the story She was the house, or she occupied a PO office.
A what?
A PO office. Now you think, what's he talking about? Well, a PO is Chinese name for a soul.
Oh, okay.
So what she did, what people would do, and this is I don't know if it's true, that's just fictional. I actually love the idea of it. But when a person was about to die, they would go to her PO office and give her an envelope with some details about their person and their life and some sort of insignia. And the idea was that whoever then inherited that person's soul would go to her PO office and she would identify the envelope and give them the envelope with the details of the person's life. And the two combining features which linked the two people was that they had a birthmark in the same place. They had the same birthmark. And that's what would be on the envelope. So she was a midwife for two lost souls, if you like. So that was the kind of story I played with. I love that kind of stuff. So.
Wow. Fascinating.
It is, isn't it? But that's, that's all there for folks to read about. I'm sure some folks are familiar with that concept. That's just one element of the story. There's a whole lot of stuff about the Bagua, the I Ching, the tools of divination. I realized that even in the construction of this wall and the wall around that area, the Chinese had used the principles of the Tao in constructing. So the water was in the right place. Had to be in the east or something. There had to be mountains to the west. There had to be sea to the and it was all configured so that this was in line, in harmony with the natural forces. So in a way, they're healing the land. I'm sure you're familiar.
Yeah, like feng shui, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, it's all in line with the principles of feng shui. So, yeah, you can tell I'm sort of fascinated by it all. I'm actually thinking about having another area.
Have you been there at all to China?
I haven't. No, I'm afraid.
Is it on your to-do list?
Not really. It's a hell of a trek. But no, it's not. But you never know. Yeah,
you never know.
Yeah, you never know.
Okay.
So you see it goes uphill and down dale. So you can, it's got this kind of sinuous nature, the shape of the wall itself. So you can imagine that it naturally fits with the idea of a dragon with its looping structure. Yeah, very atmospheric.
Very right. So that's book 2.
Yeah.
Let's go on to book 3.
So that was another historical fiction story, which was this time set in Eastern Europe. It was called The Coronation, and the cover there is in the top right-hand corner, screen. And what I was exploring in that novel is set in a place called what is now Kaliningrad, actually, in Russia. It's an oblast or a province stuck between Poland and Lithuania. Back in the day, it was called Königsberg. And Königsberg was King Frederick the Great's capital in 1760. And I chose that particular location because I thought that was one of the few areas in the world, in Eastern Europe, in Prussia, where the feudal system actually worked to how it was meant to work. And I wanted to use that as a comparison to what was then on setting, if you like, which was capitalism. Because the 1760s was the decade in which James Watt made his discovery of the steam engine. And basically that was the genesis of the modern realm, the modern era, the world we live in today. You know, it would not be as it is if we didn't have industrialization. I'll give you a comparison. You go into a shoe shop, a cobbler's, a Cordwain's in 1760, right? When he made his discovery. What do you find? What do you see? Andrina, what do you see? Any ideas?
Excuse me. Right, in a cobbler's shop.
Yes.
Well, lots of soles.
That's right. Do you see any shoes?
You may get a few.
I don't think you do.
No?
No, I don't think so. Because how does he know what size?
So not shoes for repairing?
Maybe shoes for repairing, yes.
That's what I was thinking of.
But not new shoes. Right, so not one new shoe, 1760. A lot of soles and repairs, right. You go back 7,000 years to Jericho, say, 5,000 BC, you go into a cobbler's, do you see anything different? I don't think so. The point being, for 7,000 years, nothing changes where cobblers are concerned. So if you're standing in a cobbler's in 1760s and you're looking ahead for 250 years, you're going to think, well, actually, nothing's going to change because it's been the same for 7,000 years. So if I go into a cobbler's in 2024, I'm going to see the same thing. I'm going to see a load of soles, a load of leather, and a few repairs. Oh, no. Because if you go to streets near where you are, Andrea, you go to the Clarks, and they are the manufacturers of shoes on every high street in the UK. And there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pairs of shoes in that store. And that's the comparison. And that's just one thing, that's cobblers. And it is cobblers, isn't it? But you know, you go into a supermarket, this huge amount of stock. And for what? You know, you go into a butcher's in 1760, they didn't have that amount of stock. They didn't have supermarkets. The point I'm making is industrialization has flooded the world with stock. But I'm not saying it's a better or worse thing. I'm just saying that's what's happened. So I wanted to go back to the genesis of when that changed. And that was James Watt's discovery of the steam engine. Because without industrialization, without factories, without mass migration, which we've still got today, you would not have the world we have today.
True.
And so that was the beginning of capitalism and the end of the feudal era. So that was the story, the bigger picture story I wanted to explore. The backstory to those days was also the 7 Years' War, which was between Austria, Russia, who were Catholic, and Prussia, which was Protestant. The English, who happened to be fighting the French in Canada, because they're always fighting the French. They happened to be quite a rich country at the time, because it was peak of empire and all the rest of it. We're not a rich country anymore. But anyway, so they were kind enough to pay King Frederick the Great's armies payroll. That was nice of them, wasn't it? But at the same time, I read the other day, just so you know, some American diplomats were in Paris trying to get a loan from the French to sponsor the War of Independence against the Brits. And they got it. They got £8,000 apparently. The French
Really?
8,000 quid, yeah. So lots of things were going on in those days. And of course, that resulted in 1776. A few years later, you got the Declaration of Independence. So that's a bit about the second novel, but it's set in this area, I said, called the third novel, Königsberg. And what I'm kind of picturing those days is that the question I'm posing is, I suppose, a spiritual question, was with the energies that got used for the vision that resulted in the Industrial Revolution. Were they meant for something else? Was the human race meant to take a different route?
Mm.
Were we meant to go down the industrial route, or were we meant to go down a different route? And if so, what was that route? And why didn't we take it? So they're the kind of questions I was trying to pose in that. Because clearly we took the industrial route, and now we live in a society beset with worries about money, and for better or for worse. So anyway, that's a bit about the third book.
Right. Yeah, because you're giving people a taste or an appetite. If they, when what you're sharing, listeners will think, "Oh, I like the sound of that. I'll go and get that book or what have you."
Yeah, thank you.
Okay,
So,
books.
Yeah, book 4. I suppose another thing I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get. I realise I'm trying to question some of the assumptions we make about our world and how we got to what we've inherited. Because you realise everything we've got in this world we've inherited from history in one way or another. So even if you walk into a Clark's shoe shop today, the way it's laid out has come from history. It's come from people being trained as designers, as shop fitters, and all the rest of it, who learned their trade from somebody who did it 50 years ago, who modified it from somebody who did it 100 years ago. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally.
So it works by accretion or aggregation, a bit like a tower. That's where, if you like, the tarot card, the tower, the falling tower comes in. Because a tower is built on foundations. And if you don't get your foundations right, the ecology will test it. And ecology is tested by things like lightning strikes. Jeff will tell you all about those. That's why there's a lightning strike on the falling tower. If you know your tower. Do you know the tower?
And he lives in Tower Street.
He doesn't, does he?
On the corner.
Jeff, you never told me.
He's got the frogs going in the background, so he's muted himself. Otherwise, they'll be taking over the show.
Really?
I'm back.
I was waking up this morning. I mean, I tell you, I love this kind of stuff. I was listening to the birds sing, and I wonder. I heard this explanation of why birds sing, and then what happens is that the planet gets washed with lovely silver force, which comes from the east, and it fills the bird up, and they can't stop. They have to sing. So actually, what you're listening to is a robotic response, because they have no choice. Even though the song is beautiful to our ears, they are expressing their delight, if you like, that's how we see it, at processing this high force, this very high force, the force that comes at dawn, just as, we're washed by a gust of gold at dusk. That's why it's called August, AU gust. AU is the chemical symbol for gold.
No, please, just my comment.
Okay. Can I just take a pause there and leave you for a moment?
You certainly can.
Hey, it's all right. Yeah, so it's quite enthralling, isn't it, for an individual? What did he say? He's 80 years old.
No, he's never 80 years old. You made that up.
Oh, he's an author. He's writing fiction. Here we go.
With a collar on my lady. She makes me to do her collar. So, fourth book, is it?
Yeah, is it the Coronation or the Abdication?
The Abdication. Okay, yeah. So you can see they aren't a pairing, but you can see after a coronation you might get an abdication. So you understand that the coronation was not about a king or a queen, but I was playing with the notion that if there is going to be an evolution in the human race, it's going to be in the head. It's the only thing. There's no point in growing another finger or growing another leg, right? What's going to happen, if anything's going to happen at all, is it's going to happen in the head. There's going to be a greater permission, greater ESP, greater clairvoyance, greater perception, greater understanding of the way of the world. So it's in the mental and higher emotional processes. So the coronation had that in mind, if you like. So the corona of the sun is where the word comes from, and the corona is you put in a coronation, you put a crown on somebody's head. So in the abdication, I wanted to explore a bit more about what I call a human deal. What's the deal here? Here we are in this place. We're born in a human body. It's got these magnificent capabilities. It's self-programming to the utmost degree. You can teach it to do anything, and it will do it. It will replay it. Quite extraordinary capabilities. But what's it all for? And I wanted to explore some of the more spiritual elements in the abdication, because I suppose the opening lines, the idea of the book is, because in the 1760s, the coronation, there was a lot about Homo sapiens sapiens, which is the name of our genus. Sapiens means wise. So if you have a house, right, and the lintel on the house says Homo sapiens sapiens, so the house is called humanity, if you like. So in the house lives wisdom, because that's what sapiens means. And in the house, alongside wisdom, the brothers and sisters of wisdom, are things like care, consideration, kindness, warmth, benevolence. Are you with me?
Yeah.
They are its sisters and brothers of wisdom, perception, understanding. Okay. So then you can say, well, if that's what lives in the house, then there's certain things that don't belong in there. And one of those things will be cruelty. So that's the basic notion of abdication, because it's basically saying, if one is cruel, one abdicates from being human, at least in that moment. And of course, unfortunately, we're all subject to that criteria, if you like. I mean, it's a harsh criteria. It's a bit like, the weighing of the heart against a feather. I mean, for God's sake, a feather? I was speaking to a friend of mine yesterday about this. He said, I want a heavy feather. Because, I mean, when is your heart lighter than a feather? For God's sake. Extraordinary conception. I mean, whoever came up with that one? Anyway, so the abdication is about a young woman. And the backstory is, I learned from the old Dragon's Head that a setting is really important for a novel. And I imagine this ravine. On one side of the ravine was a town called Unity. And in Unity, an embryonic human race lived in harmony with a bunch of angels. So we go back to the angels. But at the time, they are like the birds. They're like the bees. They're like flowers. They're like animals. They don't have free will. So one day, the world changes and they're given free will. Being a bloody-minded lot, they build a bridge across this ravine, and they build a town on the other side called. They build this sort of rope bridge and live on the other side in their town, and they agreed to have this kind of communion with the angels, but after a while, somebody walks across the bridge and they fall off. So the folks in the town begin to think that they are now opposed by a bunch of demons who have changed from being angels because somebody's fallen off the bridge. So there then becomes this, they lose connection to the angels, which was supposed to be their evolutionary enhancement, if you like. And then a young woman who still believes that the angels are in this town called Unity arrives in the town trying to cross the bridge. And it's about her journey of and the tests she has to go through, and she has to try and persuade all the people that what she believes is still true. And so that's the sense of the abdication and the sort of trials and tribulations that this young woman goes through trying to cross the bridge to get back to the angels. So, of course, you know, one of the notions in the story, and it's a bit like E.T., because I once heard somebody say that E.T. is a religious film. And I thought, well, how can E.T. be a religious film? But it is a religious film because it's about going home. And what is religious about that is, of course, that is what your spirit wants to do. It wants to go home from where it came from.
As soon as we land.
Yeah, so you know, it doesn't. It sort of belongs here. It belongs in the biological shielding that we call this body, but it needs all that to stay here. You know, and we just walk it around trying to take it to places where it gets enhanced. So that was the kind of metaphor I'm trying to use in the story called The Abdication. Yeah, so that's a novel. That's not historical in that sense. So that was the fourth one. So we better get on to the fifth one because we're running out of time.
No, but it's amazing. Like, you know, like you're covering history, so much history, and it's like, oh yeah, and you know, things that you forget about or on the back burner, or things you remember you learned at school, and like how you're bringing them all in. You know, it's the gift that you have in your writing.
I guess so, yeah.
What do you mean you guess so? You do.
Well, yes, I do. What I'm cautious about, the reason I respond like that is that you know, like you get these surveys, and they want to know, you know, when you went to this shop, how many out of 10 would you give it?
Oh yeah.
Somebody says, "Oh, I thought it was perfect. I'm going to give 10 out of 10." So I'm always wary of 10 out of 10 because it means there's no room for improvement.
Mm.
So I suppose one of the ways I don't reject, you know, praise, but I'm wary of it because I don't want to give myself 10 out of 10, if you see what I'm saying, because otherwise I stop.
Yeah.
There's no room for improvement.
Mm-hmm.
So we on to the next one? Do you want to do that?
Yeah. Let's go for the next one.
Okay, so that's the Mark of the Salamander.
Your latest novel.
So, you know, I've mentioned that there are some themes in these previous novels which are to do with coming of age. They tend to have young protagonists, but what I call mature themes, you know, exploring these spiritual dimensions, esoteric ideas, and so on. So I wanted to come home to England, that's my home country, and explore what I consider to be England's coming of age, which was, to my mind, the Elizabethan era. And what I mean by coming of age is that there was something substantially different to what happened afterwards to what went on before. So in English history, for just to remind ourselves, you know, up until the 1580s, England was a kind of misty isle on the edge of mainland Europe. But after folks like John Dee and Queen Elizabeth, of course, Francis Drake, you know, and William Shakespeare and so on. A few hundred years later, you had the Greenwich Meridian, where you have 0 degrees. The center of the world, if you like, is going through Greenwich. So from going from, you know, a misty isle on the edge of Europe, suddenly the country's at the middle of the world. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you get my point. So I wanted to explore that transitional period which started that change. Because the Greenwich Meridian didn't come about, I think, until the 17th or 18th century. But the change began in the Elizabethan era. And I wanted to explore some of the dynamics of that time. And the main character is a young man who is a Flemish immigrant. Unfortunately, some of the names of the crew of Francis Drake's Golden Hind are well known. And I list them in the beginning of the book. And one of them is a guy named Nelly, N-E-L-E. So I changed the name to Newland, which I thought was a bit more commonplace. And he apparently was a Flemish immigrant. So I wondered how a man from northern France ended up sailing around the world with Francis Drake's Golden Hind. So that's what was the genesis of the story, if you like. So I made up the whole story to explain how it happened. At the same time, trying to get, you know, I think what I tried to do is get inside what it was like to live inside his body, what he felt, what he smelled, what he lived, what his desires were, how he was conditioned to think about his world, which I think is kind of the way you have to approach these things, because I think in different ways we're all conditioned to think about our world in a very particular way, and I suppose one of the attractions of writing historical fiction is that I can step outside my conditioning for a little while, and try to appreciate how other people thought about their world. So the mark of the salamander, I mean, the origin of that title, back in medieval times, there was quite a lot of esoteric philosophy going on. And there was a guy named Paracelsus, who was a Swiss occultist, if you like. There was quite a lot of occult stuff going on in these days. You know, John Dee, who I mentioned, he wrote a book about his conversations with an angel called Medema, who I actually feature in the novel. This guy Paracelsus came up with the idea that whilst we have earth, air, fire and water, the 4 elements, each of those elements has a spirit, an esoteric spirit associated with it. So you're probably familiar with the idea of a gnome, G-N-O-M-E. And he said a gnome is the spirit of earth. An undine is the spirit of water, and a sylph is the spirit of air, and a salamander is a spirit of fire. So I wanted to explore this whole thing about, if you like, living fire. You know, like spirit is a piece of living fire. I've heard it called a spoonful of God, which is another wonderful description. John Dee was the first 007. I'm just reading. It's cool, isn't it? Yeah, he was, isn't he? Yeah, in fact, my story features in the second novel, which I might mention, the hero, Newland, becomes an agent for Francis Walsingham, who was the Queen's spy master. And he uses his sort of prescient abilities, his astral abilities, to predict the crimes that are going to happen. Because, of course, that's what a forward-looking police force would be doing, wouldn't it? But anyway, I mean, it has been featured in some stories, hasn't it? But that's another one. So the salamander, yeah, so he the story, Newland has a fascination with fire. And that's what gives him this mark. What he has is three little squiggly lines beneath.
Can you share what a salamander is for people that don't know?
Yeah, they're. I did send you a picture. It is actually a lizard. It has a sort of physical manifestation, but in my story, it's obviously a spirit. So I imagined it to be like a lizard-like spirit, a sort of lithe, with sort of flames and so on. I don't know if you've ever heard of something called St. Elmo's fire.
Yeah.
So I got into a whole lot of stuff about fire and its different manifestations. So St. Elmo's fire is when you get electrical storms at sea, and you get this kind of numinous lightning that appears around the masts of ships. And that's what the sailors call St. Elmo's fire. And dear old St. Elmo, if you know the story, apparently they call it St. Elmo's fire because the poor soul was hit by lightning, but survived. And for his troubles, they called it St. Elmo's fire. So poor fellows, that's how he's remembered. But anyway, you pick up all these random bits of information.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, you research all this stuff. So anyway, the mark of a salamander, as I was saying, is Newland has these three little lines beneath his index finger, and they are the mark. That's the mark. So they appear on his hand. So if he rubs the hand, that mark, then sometimes he would get these sort of astral visions, and it would transport him to the astral worlds, and he could do astral travel, which I'm sure you've come across in your own studies and researches, and possibly even do a little bit yourself. You've done a bit of astral traveling, Andrew?
A little bit, yes.
Just a little bit. So I sent you a couple of conjectures, didn't I? I sent you from ancient Egypt. I don't know if you've got them there.
Yeah. Did you? If you've got the picture of the salamander there, Jeff, that Justin sent us.
Yeah. So a whole lot of stuff about astral traveling, and the story. We're running out of time here. That's
all right. Because you're going to read us a snapshot of your book.
Oh, yeah, shall I? This is from chapter 19. It's called Home at Last. So basically, Newland has sailed around the world with Francis Drake, which is an extraordinary journey in itself, considering most people in those days never went further.
There we are.
There's a salamander brooch, which actually features in the story. This was found on a Spanish vessel off Northern Ireland, I think. But I used it in the novel because I thought it gives some physical description to what folks might imagine a salamander to be. You see the sort of gold, the gold filigree and the red rubies. So here's a little extract from the novel. It was midway through the afternoon watch on a Monday. It wasn't any old Monday. It was a special Monday. Not because of an extra beer ration, nor because of the smell of fish emanated from the galley. No, it was because on that autumn day, nearly all 58 surviving crew members hung over the gunwale, their eyes dripping with expectation and glued to the horizon. On occasion, they glanced up at the topmast and the barrowman, as if waiting for a message from the heavens. None came, even after they passed the Isles of Scilly, nor did it come after they passed the Wolf Rock. It surely wouldn't be long in coming. As the creaking of the sails ceased, the Golden Hind glided serenely through the waters, as if drawn forward by a divine wind. Even the gulls stopped squawking. A light rain shower washed the decks. The men gazed at the white flecks on the waves. Amidst the quiet, a cry went out, and travelled down the mizzenmast, across the poop deck, and into the soul of every member. Land ho! Newland stood next to Fletcher, the preacher, who raised his hands like an Old Testament prophet and cried out, "Oh my God!" Then he knelt on the deck, hands clasped in a prayer of thanksgiving. The other hands, all long-haired, heavily bearded and stinking of piss, ale and perspiration, planted their knees on the deck. To Newland, this moment felt portentous. It was one of collective bliss, in which men of all ranks, natures and ages, shared a sublime experience and encountered, perhaps for a few seconds only, the most concentrated religious feeling in the world, that of belonging to each other and to a land. Perhaps they didn't know it fully then, but maybe they had an inkling of it, as Newland did. But in that moment, each of them knew that, through their voyage, through their endeavours and their courage, they had unchained the shackles of the past, cut most of the remaining threads of the Gordian knot of papal suppression, summoned the fresh, clean winds of the future, and set the people of England on a course towards the discovery of themselves and towards an exploration of the world and its peoples. Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
so fabulous. Right, so you've completed that one and you've got another one in the making.
Yeah, no, that is the Midnight of Eights, which is the sequel to this novel. I had intended to write just one novel. I don't like series, but my muse seemed to want two books. So the Midnight of Eights covers the period from 1580, after Newland gets back from circumnavigation. He becomes an agent working for Francis Walsingham, who had a house in a place called Barn Elms in Mortlake, or Barnes rather, or east of London. And he kind of uses his abilities to foretell the machinations of the Mary Queen of Scots and things like that. And it culminates in the repulse, not so much the defeat, of the Spanish Armada. So that is the moment when the Midnight of Eights takes its title, and I'm not going to explain how it takes its title, but it's quite an extraordinary set of coincidences, quite an extraordinary alignment of combinations and alignments and synchronicity, which I discovered in writing the novel.
Have you, because obviously you're writing about history, have you had any sort of realization of having a past life in any of these scenes?
That's a good question. I don't know. Not specifically, Gina, but it's a good question. I do wonder, I know you talked a little bit about healing at the beginning, healing different parts of oneself. I don't know if you've ever heard the idea that you can go back to different periods of history and you can heal them. I mean, that's a sort of generic idea. I'm not quite sure how you do it, or whether in the rewriting of these things that in some way it does offer an easement, if you like, which is along the way to a healing, isn't it? To some of the horrific times that have happened and still happen, unfortunately.
Yeah. So how far are you with book 6 this will be? How far are you?
That's actually finished. It's gone to the publisher. And as I was saying, I've got a bit of work after this to help them come up with a cover design, write up the back cover blurb, and put some finishing touches to how we'll do the marketing. So that should come out 28th of October is what they're suggesting.
Okay. So how do you promote yourself? How do you get seen and be heard? Obviously, like opportunities on shows like this, because
Yeah,
you know,
very
people,
much.
we put up your website, people
Yeah,
can get in contact with you. You're on Facebook.
yeah, I do a lot of that. I do author talks because I've got books based around history. What I do is I put together a little PowerPoint presentation about the history of the period and what led up to it, and then do a little bit of promotion about the book at the end of it. So I've got 8 or 9 talks that I give. I've also written a couple of talks. One called "History Repeats Itself," and another one called "In Search of the Spirit of the Times." And so, you know, you get a sort of flavour of what those talks might be about, as well as specific talks focusing on the Elizabethan period, Egyptian period, Chinese period, Prussian period, and things like that. And then I do book signings. I do a lot of book signings in Waterstones, independent bookshops, W.H. Smith's. And I really enjoy talking to people, as you can see. And, you know, I find the best people to talk to are people like yourselves, actually. You're a very good interviewer, because it's not just who asks the questions, it's what asks the questions. You know, it's what's coming out from you that prompts the reply. And you can ask a question in 100 different ways, and 99 of them will get a bland answer, but one of them will get a 10-minute exposition about what inspired the person. Do you know what I mean? So you're a very good interviewer. Thank you very
much.
prompting me in such a good way.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you would like to share or say before we close up today?
Just, you know, to say, if folks want to, you know, look me up on the website. Jeff's kindly been putting those up. My books are available through Amazon, can be ordered through UK bookstores, Australian bookstores, American bookstores. I also do what are called blog tours, which I don't know if you know about, where different bloggers will feature my book on their website. They'll do reviews. You can read reviews. It's a good way of getting them. I also do interviews with folks like yourselves. I had one the other day with a lady in India who had also read the book and who likes my writing. Yeah, so there's readers and authors and all around the world, aren't there? It's fantastic, really.
Oh, well, wonderful. Well, it's been an absolute delight yet again, because you're, like I say, you're so full of your stories and the novels and all the aspects you bring in, you know, giving people a flavour. Because I think, oh, I wouldn't mind reading some of that, but, you know, I got a backlog of things here that I haven't read. But yeah, so okay, well, if there's nothing else, thank you for being a guest this week and sharing all your information about your books. Really fascinating. And perhaps we'll meet up for coffee when you're up this way.
Yeah, well, I am up this way.
Well, yeah. Well, we'll talk after.
Yeah. Can I share one last thing with you?
Yeah, of course.
You just did this. You
Yeah.
know, you put your hands together. Do you know the origins? You know what this does?
Well, I know it links chakras, the heart, and
you know, you get a horseshoe. Okay. And when you get a horseshoe, what people will do is they will put what is called a keeper bar on the 2 strands of the horseshoe. It's like a bar. So it's like that. That's the keeper bar, and that's the horseshoe. Okay. It stops the magnetism being lost. Okay. So that is a keeper bar. Are you with me?
yeah, go on.
It maintains the forces and elements and processes inside you. It acts as a keeper bar. That's what it does. That's why it's the origins of that movement, which we now use, obviously, in Christian ideals and so on. But if you look up keeper bar to do with horseshoes, it will tell you about what it does.
Well, I've never heard of that before, so there we go. You learn something every day.
Yeah, you said that, didn't you?
Well, you certainly do. Gosh.
Yeah. Lovely to talk to you guys.
All right.
All
Well,
right, very good.
once again.
Yeah.
And yes. So thank you for everybody for tuning in to Dreaming the New Dream.
Yeah.
Same time, same place next week.